This video entails a hypothesis which implies there need be only one fundamental force of nature, and hypothesizes through this single fundamental force a physical explanation as to why there is a difference in the relative strength between the so-called fundamental forces. The hypothesis herein stems from a previous hypothesis titled, "Is the strong force fundamentally electromagnetic?" and an insight to the fine structure constant. Some of the insight gained from this previous hypothesis, for which the hypothesis herein stems from, has been written within that video's description, particularly under the subtitle "Soft Hypothesis on the Fine Structure Constant being the ratio of the Coulomb force and the strong force." Stemming from these insights, we ask a fundamental question. Why should we get a numerical ratio of these forces, the electromagnetic force and the strong force, which is not equivalent to 1, if indeed they are fundamentally the same force? Generalized in another way, if we have two charges that are separated from one another at a given distance apart, and there truly is only one fundamental force of the universe, then why is there, and how can there be, distinctions in the strength of this single fundamental force between these two charges at a given distance apart, such that it would seem reasonable, though herein argued incorrect, to classify these strength differences as distinct fundamental forces? Perhaps the following can provide some insight. The insight begins with the ratio of the electromagnetic force, in terms of the Coulomb force, between a proton and an electron at some given distance apart, to the gravitational force between a proton and an electron at the same given distance apart. It seems mathematically suggestive that the ratio of the electromagnetic force to the gravitational force is related to the ratio of the radius of the universe and the radius of the proton. This could suggest that perhaps the reason we get this ratio of forces, or ratios of so-called fundamental forces in general from our mathematical formalisms of such, might have something to do with the ability of charges to feel and respond to one another as distance scales change. To elaborate on these insights and imply a hypothesis to explain how a single fundamental force between two charges might change in strength as the distance scales between them changes, and how this single fundamental force between two charges, even at a given distance apart, might change in strength, consider the following. Consider the total number of charges in the universe. On a universal scale, there's a lot of electric field screening/shielding between any two given charges which are separated from one another by such a vast distance scale because of the sheer number of other independent intervening charges there are between these two given charges. All of this electric field screening/shielding hinders/obstructs much of the mutual charge these two given charges, say a proton and an electron, experience from one another, thus decreasing the strength of the force these two given charges experience from one another. We might measure the force between these given charges and call the force between these given charges the gravitational force. Now let us move the two such given charges, the proton and electron from our previous scenario, closer together so that they are no longer screened/shielded from one another by most of the other charges in the universe. There is no intrinsic physical distinction between these given charges in and of themselves with respect to the previous scenario, but the effect of this reduction in electric field screening/shielding has made the effective charge and corresponding strength of the force the two charges mutually experience from one another greater than in the previous scenario. We might call this new force that we measure between the two charges the electromagnetic force. Now let us move these two given charges, our proton and electron from our previous scenario, so close together that the physical extent of their respective electric fields overlap one another. In this scenario, within the limits of mutual field overlap, there is no intervening electric field screening/shielding, which would seem to suggest that the effective strength of the force measured between our two given charges in this scenario would be greater than the measured strength of the force in the second scenario, and even greater than the measured strength of the force in the first scenario, even though, again, there would be no intrinsic physical distinction between these given charges in and of themselves with respect to the previous scenarios. We might call this new, even stronger force the strong force. The intrinsic physical qualities/properties of the two given charges with respect to themselves remains the same in all three above scenarios. However, the measured strength of the force between those two charges changes as a result of changes in electric field screening/shielding by other independent charges between them. To be a bit more specific, the measured strength of the force between two charges at a given distance apart would depend on whether or not and to what extent there was electric field screening/shielding between the two given charges by other independent charges. The measured distinction in the strength of the force between each scenario is therefore simply an artifact. In reality, there is no fundamental difference between the forces in each scenario. Fundamentally, it is all one and the same force.